Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Global HR Forum 2021. I will be the MC for the next 2 days for track B of this forum on education. I am announcer Kim Na-yoon. It's nice to meet you today. I'd like to begin by thanking all our participants who are connected online and offline. And to prevent the spread of COVID-19, we are having a hybrid type of forum this year, combining online and offline. It would have been best if we had all of our participants be here on site to listen to the presentations directly. So it's very unfortunate that we are unable to do so and ask you for your understanding. We'd like to remind you that we are strictly abiding by the quarantine measures here on site. The theme of this year's forum is Digital Transformation, ESG, and Sustainable Future. We have seen that COVID has led to the spread of online activities such as remote learning and video conferencing, which have become part of our lives, and the speed of digital transformation is accelerating. And due to climate change and other natural disasters, there's been more concern about sustainable future. At this year's forum, we will be looking into these global megatrends and find ways to foster the talents needed to carry out the needed actions. We hope that this forum will be of much use to all our participants. We will now begin track B on education of Global HR Forum 2021, Session 1. Session 1 is on higher education innovation in the digital era. Since the beginning of digital transformation, we are able to order coffee online via app, and cloud computing is used to share in-office information. And this digital transformation is bound to change higher education format as well. Standard interoperable curriculum can be developed and shared among universities and for deep learning, and online open platforms can allow at-home learning of the different courses. On these new forms of education that we can expect in the future, we have the leading experts in this field who will be engaging in discussion. The presenters are Kim Hyungyul, Professor of Department of History and Culture at Sookmyung Women's University, and Hong Jung-min, Director of EduTech Laboratory at HUNET. And the moderator is Chung Jintaek, President of Korea University. Please welcome them with a warm hand. Thank you very much. I will now turn over the microphone to our moderator. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking all of the participants to the B-1 session. In fact, we had scheduled 3 speakers for this session, but due to unavoidable circumstances, one presenter was not able to make it. So we have 2 presenters with us. As you have just heard, each presenter will be speaking for about 20 minutes, and after we listen to the 2 presentations, we will have a Q&A session. And so if you do have questions or comments, please make sure to access the link that we had sent you and upload your questions. And we'll try to address those during the Q&A session after the presentations. So we'd like to begin with the first presentation by Professor Kim Hyungyul of Sookmyung Women's University. Please welcome him with a warm hand.
Hi, 반갑습니다.
Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you. I teach Western history at Sookmyung Women's University. My name is Hyungyul Kim. I've never really had an opportunity to stand before such a large audience. But I heard from the former Prime Minister of Denmark speaking about his past experience. And I think that that is what I will do. So digital transformation and innovation is the topic here. I used to be very ignorant when it came to digital related issues, and I teach history. So it's actually the last subject to implement innovation. If you look at the history books, as you know, we talk about the past. But let me try to talk about myself. I studied in Germany, And the reason that I went to Germany to study abroad was because, first of all, I do not like to speak English. But actually, by chance, it's about 20 years ago, in 2002, there is a European Studies Center at Harvard, and I had a chance to go there as a visiting scholar. And so, but however, I was not able to get into the center because of my lack of fluency in English. So what I did was I went there and into the US and started to study the English language. And I was supervising children who were learning how to swim. However, I didn't have that much chance to improve my English, but nevertheless, I started to take part as a visiting scholar. And as a visiting scholar, I was able to listen to all of the different lectures, and I could see that everyone were using laptops. Until then, actually, I really didn't utilize a lot of the digital tools. The only email account that I used was the one that was given by my school, Sookmyung Women's University. But I saw all the students utilizing laptops. So that was the first time that I purchased my very own laptop. And then I used my laptop to get access to the internet. So that was back in 2002. So I started to use my laptop to utilize the dictionary, English Germany dictionary, English Korean dictionary, for example. And I could not use textbooks written in Germany because I was in the US. But I was reading the history textbooks in English, and I could see that it's quite different from the German language. English is different. I couldn't even distinguish verbs from nouns, for example. But I could see that the students were searching the web for information. And I could see that there was a lot of information on the web. There was a professor from Berkeley, and he said that he utilizes a Facebook group. And the reason that he started to do that was because he saw all the students utilizing laptop. And it was the first time that Facebook launched that kind of a service back then. So he created a Facebook group in the field of law. That was the major that he was teaching. And so he went around the universities in California and started to introduce the benefits of using that kind of a service. And I saw a video of him actually promoting that service. When I tried to first utilize that service, actually, I didn't know how to use it well. My students didn't know. So as it we had to spend a lot of time with the basics, for example, becoming friends, and then it became the midterms. And everything was written in English. Like I said, was not fluent in English. And I was not that tech savvy. And back then, Korean students did not use a lot of laptops, and the internet connection was not that good. Of course, there were iPads and there were different digital tools, and there were those who would utilize the digital services. So I started to try to utilize these tools and to search for history, data, information. And I learned about the word curation that is applied to these services. So using the computer groups and also speaking in English, these were actually disadvantages that turned students off. The students started to drop off my course. And then the MOOC courses became popular. MOOCs are massive open online courses. And before then, at Berkeley University, they would actually stream live lectures. And that led to the creation of MOOCs. And I was quite surprised to see this kind of approach. So the internet started to be used in 2002. We had the infrastructure, and starting in 2012, there were these professional collective intelligence that was being utilized. And Coursera is a profit organization, and then MIT and Harvard, the nonprofit groups, started to jump into this MOOC market and started providing services. And then in 2012, there was a history professor in Princeton University who started to give MOOC courses, and I started to utilize his textbook. According to the president of edX, we call this a big text. We can use the big text. The US professors were wary of this at first because they actually were concerned that there would be a domination. However, then there was the concept of flipped learning that was introduced. And a lot of famous professors, they would actually give lectures, and you could listen to the lectures and engage in discussions. And then the professor would add on to the existing lectures. And that's when we started to talk about the flipped classes, curation and designing the contents. And that was when, at Sungmyung Women's University, we started to utilize the flipped learning experience. And Michael Sanders' book, What is Justice? We utilized that book in our class. I did a search on the internet, and there is a broadcasting company, PBS, and there's a Boston chapter. And luckily, this PBS would provide a transcript of the lectures that it broadcasted. And as you know, there is TED. TED, you in the beginning did not provide subtitles. It was only open to a number of people. And then Tsinghua University, it started to provide subtitles for its contents, and that's what led to the wide use of subtitles on the TED contents. And what I did was I also created a website to provide an online learning experience, and I tried to promote the service. But what I realized back then was that there's a lot of good English content, but really you need to have the ability to curate the good contents. There's a lot of good open information out there, open contents, not just Michael Sanders, it's not just TED. There's a lot out there, and you have to be able to curate them. And so we wanted to make a K-MOOC. There's a lot of good lectures around the world. And there was a concern that perhaps the creation of K-MOOC would block the offering of these outstanding, already existing contents. So with that in mind, what I did was, because of my lack of English fluency, I experienced some challenges, but I actually worked with some students. And so what we did was, actually this is starting from about 3 to 4 years ago, and the core of the MOOC courses
강의 위주가 아니에요. 강의는 그거는
is that we looked at some of the contents out there. And if you look at the lectures provided by Mike Sanders, you will see that these professors from Harvard or the professors in Korea, they're not that different. They have these contents that they provide, and in the past we were not able to gain access to these contents. But now we have the archives and we have the internet. And as you know, Nowadays, we can directly purchase goods from overseas markets. And it's the same for the digital contents as well. We can remix the contents, and also on a website, we can enjoy digital humanitism. And we can see a fast advancement of this type of service. Not many people in Korea are aware of this, but this exists. And the curated contents. For example, in the history course, there can be the religious revolution, and you can gain access to these wonderful contents that have been handpicked by the professors and gain access to that. And then you can actually listen to the discussions, the forums. It's not just the students who listen to the lectures, but also the professors. They take part in the discussions, and collective intelligence is created through these discussion forums. Google Knox is utilized for transcribing, and just one moment, please.
집에서 듣고 와가지고 발표하고
And what I had the students to do is listen to the online courses and come to my class and engage in discussions. I think it would be better for me to show you visually. So I have these links that I prepared, and perhaps I can show you later. For example, the students, what they were concerned about was actually preparing for the TOEFL exam, and they really did not use a lot of textbooks in English, especially for the history majors. If you look at the science majors, they do utilize global textbooks, but for the humanities majors, the students were not that accustomed. But starting from about 2 to 3 years ago, what I did was that I created a Facebook group, and I had my students utilize such tools. So you can see the tools on the screen now. These are education tools. You don't have to really study them separately. You can go into the MOOC offerings and you can utilize these tools. So starting from 3 years ago, I started to provide the links to these MOOC courses, and you can see that there are many different universities. There's literature courses, there are history courses and philosophy courses. And now I offer a list of MOOC courses, over 400 of them offered by the renowned universities around the world. And I have them organized by country. So there are over 400 universities from many different countries, including Harvard. And here you can see a list of the MOOC transcriptions from Harvard University. So this is related to digital innovation. I think that innovation is a little bit slow to come for the history department, but I think that the history department has a lot to benefit from these innovations because the archives, the documents are all included in these digital contents. So the field of history was included in my edited list of MOOC courses. There's about 150 history-related courses that I have on the list. And then there's business courses and computer science courses also on the list. Listening to the MOOC courses do not provide you with a degree. But IT, computer science, and business majors do provide degrees. I understand Coursera has a very extensive offering. And I felt that Korean students are not really benefiting from this trend. They are left behind. And when we were creating KMOOC for the first time, we were talking about academic imperialism. But in Japan, what they did was when they were pursuing the Meiji Restoration, they sent scholars to the Western countries to learn from them and benchmark from them. And so Tokyo University has the greatest amount of material and resources for studying Shakespeare in Japan. And a lot of people had to go directly to Tokyo University to gain access to such material. But now you don't have to do so. It's the same for other majors as well. For example, if it's a history about women, then you can actually gain access to the digital sources. For example, there's a university in the Netherlands, and there is another university quite renowned for its collection of materials related to women's history. So you can gain access to these sources, and at the same time, there are new information sources being provided as time goes by because the cyber world has been created and many things are being added on. But the number of Ivy Leagues remain constant. What we are seeing now is not a creation of new schools, but an integration of the existing schools. In the past, I had difficulty utilizing these resources because of my lack of English fluency. But I can see now that we have a more greater variety of resources that we can utilize. I understand that still in the history departments of Korea, the pedagogy has not that changed that much, and students continue to learn the history major using Korean textbooks. But now we live in a different world, and there are so many different resources that can be utilized from worldwide. For example, a Columbia University professor offers an excellent lecture online related to the civic movement of the US. And this professor started to provide MOOC courses. It's the first time in life, he said, that he has been able to reach so many students. So he has a three-part course on this topic, on the Civil War of the United States. And also, he has a MOOC course also on the anti-Semitism. And I had a chance to listen to about 400 MOOCs, but I can see that there is convergence and integration of the different courses taking place. For example, if it's Shakespeare, then the professors who major in Shakespeare from Harvard and other schools would come together and they would cooperate and create a course together. And Harvard is actually leading this trend. It's utilizing various technology, for example, 3D and cognitive science and augmented reality. All of these topics are dealt with and taught about through the MOOC courses as well. So also, not only the universities, but also Google is providing these types of online courses. For example, AI actually is a topic that professors at schools are having a hard time keeping up. So there's a capstone project, and Google has a lot of people that it hired for AI.
코세라 같은 경우는 한국말로도 번역할 수 있는 기능이 있어요.
And Coursera also has a translation service. Computer science, you can see that there has been a lot of content translated in Korean. Samsung and SK actually do translation utilizing this. So what I'm trying to say is that you can study utilizing MOOC, and you can use edX, for example, or Coursera. And there are a lot of people, humanities majors, who studied through these services and were able to find a job in a different field because they studied that field through MOOC courses. There is a Minerva school in Korea, and the person who established the school actually founded the university because he thought that there's so many people who has the ability to enter the Ivy League schools, but the tuition is too expensive. So that person wanted to utilize the outstanding contents that can be provided free of charge. And then there's a university of people. The professors here were the retired professors from Harvard and other Ivy League schools. We can see that it is now focusing on IP and business, IT and business. Now you can have direct access to these outstanding contents and access to this wonderful collective intelligence. That's what this is all about.
이거 지금 몇 분 남았나요?
How many minutes do I have left? Actually, your time is up. Yes, so if I may say the gist, MOOC. Some people think that perhaps it's just a simple internet course or internet teaching tool, but within MOOC, you can gain access to the world. Cambridge is now part of MOOC. Oxford and Cambridge resisted, but Cambridge is now in. Oxford is the only one remaining. And I did experiments using Korean students. And at Sookmyung Women's University, I have two courses that utilizes MOOC. One is on Russian history, another is on medieval history. If you look at the medieval history topic, you can see that there are so many MOOC courses. There is almost 20 of them. And then after the midterms, what we do is we curate the data on the internet. And curating the materials on the web can be done easily because there are so many outstanding tools. You might be hesitant because of the English language, but as you know, students now, they're very fluent in English. Of course, they have been focusing their attention on TOEFL, the TOEFL exam, but they're very fluent in English, so it's much easier for them to utilize this. So I am trying to utilize the digital innovation that is ongoing. Of course, there might be some resistance from the professor's side, but I think that if there is a platform laid out, then there are so many people who can join, for example, those who have done their postdoctoral degree overseas. And I think that with more and more people joining together on this platform, we can further promote the utilization of MOOC in Korea. I think that Korea is outstanding and leading the way in many fields, but education and politics are not the fields that Korea is leading in. But I think that we can indeed lead the way in digital innovation in education if we put our minds to it. Yes, thank you very much, Professor Kim. Now, I think that I did not introduce the professor before he began his presentation. As he mentioned, Professor Kim Hyungyul is a professor at Sumyoung Women's University, and he received his master's degree in the 1990s in Germany, and also from the University of Australia, Vienna, he received his PhD. As he mentioned during his presentation, he is a leader when it comes to utilizing MOOC. Starting from 2014, he established the Korea Center for Digital Humanities at Sungkyung University and served as the first director. He translated the MIT Press MOOC in Korean, and in 2020, he translated Stanford University professor Andrew Ng's AI for Everyone MOOC and published it for free on the internet so that everyone can enjoy it for free. So I think that we can continue our discussion on this topic later on. Why don't we go on to the second presentation?
The second presenter is Director Hong Jung-min of the EduTech Laboratory at HuNet. So let me introduce him briefly. He graduated from Seoul National University, majoring in pedagogy, and he was LG Group L&D team member and Ungjin Pass One Business Plan team leader. And so he's in charge of corporate education. So please welcome him with a warm hand. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that I was invited to this site because I can offer a perspective or offer some examples on the education for the corporations. In higher education, or for the adult learners, there's still that need and the need to understand the digital transformation. And through this example, I hope there will be some implications and lessons for the universities as well. So let me begin. And there is a director called Charles Jennings, and he's famous for his 70-20 theory. So over 5 years, he had a study of hundreds of people, and the question was, where did you have the greatest learning? 20% of the respondents said through classrooms, 80% said through work or at work. So people learn mostly through workflow, it seems. And there is a biggest conference in the HRD field called the ATD21. And at this conference, Jonathan Halls had said the HRD is now in a classroom dilemma, which we have to overcome. So people think that education has to happen within classrooms, which is not necessarily true. So in corporate education, we have been pursuing continuous learning. Because previously in the industrial period, it was possible for you to work and then stop for learning and then go back to work. So we're having a space for learning and for working at the same time is what the HRD people are supposed to do. And there's also the workflow study made, and in the 1900s it would take 100 years for the amount of knowledge to grow twofold, but then after year 2000, so there is a twofold increase within just 3 days. And in terms of vocational or job training, that's what is also very being emphasized. But if you look at what the students learn through university courses, actually what they learn isn't very useful on site at work, because if you graduate previously, if you went to university, you were able to use the learning for several years. That was previously, but not the case anymore. So if you graduate from university, what you learned at school can be utilized for only about 1 year at work. And so this has great implications for universities. Universities have excellent contents, and so they have to now offer lifelong learning, and learning not just for their students at university, but for all adults and for all workers. So we need a learning momentum. So when there's something that you want to learn, When there's a problem that you need to solve, then you need continuous learning. But then most of the times people learn or engage in education only during their student years. And so 10% said that this, and I talked about the 70-20 theory earlier, and the theory is that learning that takes place in the classrooms is only 10%. 20% is learning through continuous education. 70% said the learning is happening in the workflow. So sometimes the students, they would, the workers, they would have to stop work and go back to school. Of course, there is development of MOOC and other contents, development of digital technology, and so there's no longer a focus on classrooms as being the central place where learning can take place. And so workflow learning since last year has been the key issue in HRD. And so in classrooms, we have changed to digital. However, now what's important is to be able to learn throughout the workflow. And what is needed to make this possible is digital transformation. So the word micro-learning has come to the fore. So these courses are very brief and they are directly related to workflow. When you're doing your work and there's something, a question or a problem that you need to solve, you can take 2-3 day short courses to learn. So this is what micro-learning is all about. So if there's a need, you can go on site and learn right away. Another important issue is that learning should not be just an event, but it has to be a journey. So it is a continuation of work. So it's a whole process. It has to be the same for learning and education as well. That's why we are calling this learning journey. And there's also learning transfer that's important. Ultimately, what we are aiming for is to remember what is learned and to take action. And so remembering or reinforcing what you have learned and also applying what you've learned. So all of these things are being meshed up in the metaverse and AI and other technology development. And LXP, well, is refers to learning experience platform, which is often used by the companies. And so I'd like to briefly explain these five brief concepts. First is micro learning. And micro learning is based on content that is 5 minutes or shorter. And you have heard about the short lectures. So that is the foundation of micro-learning. And micro-learning is important for three reasons. First is that 90% of the modern day people use these channels to access information. Is it mobile or PCs or television? It's mobile, as expected. So learners like to learn mostly through mobile channels. So all of the informations are being provided by mobile services. However, education in Korea is still limited to a physical space. But micro-learning is most suited to be offered through mobile. And so we looked at the learning time for all of these contents. They're on average 3 minutes long. So they're very short mobile contents. And so this is why it's called micro-learning. And we have consumption based on search, which has become the norm. So who is the consumer here? Or how do the people do searches? Do they ask the people around them, the teachers, the parents? No, it's usually the YouTube that the learners use. So it's mostly 3 to 5 minute short YouTube content. And the millennials and the Z generation, they really love these micro learning or short contents. So sometimes they say that they prefer 40-second. I mean, they say a few minutes long is too long for them, so they prefer like 40-minute content. So this micro learning has become more important, and in fact, it is being embraced by companies as well. So Microlearning can be used in different ways, and they are fungible. They can be mixed with other channels. Of course, these are not intensive courses, but even if it's provided as an offline course, microlearning can still offer much benefit because it allows the mixing of these different channels. So microlearning, e-learning, and virtual learning, digital learning, when we have this transition, there's a problem that we face. Recently, because of COVID-19, we have shifted from offline to online, and the major issue in the process was this learning gap. 30% of the students, even if you provide them with just online learning, they're able to learn. For the remaining 70%, there's no motivational factor that can encourage them to learn online. And so there are people that need to provide such assistance to these huge groups. So there is the online contents on the one line. The other hand, we have the management and care uh, aspect. So for example, offline provided all of the physical context, the face-to-face and contact-based interactions for learning. But how are we going to provide such type of learning online? So right now, it's only the contents that are shifted from offline to online. So what percentage would that be? And we heard the professor earlier, but compared to the number of applicants to the MOOC courses, do you know what the graduation course is or completion course? Completion rate is 5 to 10% only. These are the globally best, globally leading contents in the world, but it's only 5 to 10% of the learners that complete the entire course. It is because there's a huge vacuum in terms of management and care. And so in online learning, it's very important to offer both contents and management and care at the same time. There are three things that need to be considered, and we can summarize it as such. So in terms of what kind of assistance, first is motivation to learn by themselves. So the learners are exposed to a huge amount of data. There's so many different types of information that they have access to. So they have to be provided with curation services so that they can have customized learning. Secondly, there's no level of confidence among these learners because there's no teacher, no peers to prod you on. So I'm not sure if I am doing well. And so there needs to be gamification utilized to encourage confidence among the learners. And the last aspect would be, and I believe this is most important, for the online learners, it can get very lonely for them. So if you're listening to Zoom classes alone, that can be a very isolating experience. And as someone teaching also, I find this experience to be quite lonely also. So you need a form of social learning online as well. And so having autonomy and confidence and relationship provided. This comprises management and care aspect in online learning. And in fact, this is the micro learning promotion activities that we are doing at HUNIT. So we encourage the learners to establish their own learning plans, and then we try to curate customized programming for each learner, and then there's gamification and other technologies that are offered. So this is how our program is comprised of. And I said that 5 to 9% completion rate for MOOC, I mentioned that earlier. It's because it can get very lonely to learn online. And so interaction is very important. So a company like Springback, they have mentors that to provide one-on-one mentorship to their learners to ensure that there is no isolation in online learning. And there's, for bench press, for example, there's a chat room, a discussion room. And so these allow the interaction among the different learners. The second aspect is the learning journey and the transition towards this journey. So work process and learning process go hand in hand. In other words, recently, because of COVID-19, there's people don't really differentiate online and offline. So there's been a mixing, and the learning takes place in both areas also. So an LXP learning experience design makes this possible. So there are people who are designing how to learn online. So this is a part of learning journey. So learning journey and one-time event are very different. First of all, learning journey takes place in the workplace and not in classrooms. And so the learners don't have to visit HRD centers or sites to receive learning. They are learning on site at work. The more serious problem with regards to digital learning is that, of course, we had COVID, but at home or working from home is another major issue. So there's so many companies that are allowing their employees to work at home, and so they can't really visit physical sites. And so even learning has to take place within the workflow through online channels. And of course, this is the same for universities as well. So at-home work is becoming the norm, and at-home learning is becoming the norm. And in fact, this is an example of a learning journey for a department store in Korea. So they used to offer 2-3 day training courses to their employees, but now they have shifted to a learning journey, which is about 6 months long. And there are mandatory courses for each position offered, and they are all transitioning to learning journey. And we have an MBA program at HuNet, and so it used to be a 5-month online program, but now we are offering different ways of learning. Case studies, book learning, and other examples are being offered. And so the chatbots that you can utilize on site at work are all part of the learning journey package that we are offering through our program. And AI, how are we utilizing this in corporate learning? Well, AI is not a panacea. We understand that, of course, there are different ways of learning: social learning, micro learning, digital learning. And so AI plays the role of a booster. So it can make microlearning more sophisticated and connect the social learning better. And so in these ways, AI is a seed that can be used in various channels. And there are 4 major ways that AI is used. So the HRD people, this is part of the HRD people's work process. So the 4 AI uses will be dashboard, AI avatar, lecturer, curation, and chatbots. And let me explain each. First is curation and dashboards. So after data definition, the curation and dashboards are all utilizing AI technology. So keyword tagging, curation, pathway similarity, and content similarity curation are all important. And this is a leading example. So we have an accumulation of the learner's data first. So if there's a single learner and we compare that to a similar learner, what is the contents that was seen by the similar learner? And then we give recommendations to the new learner. And then secondly, in terms of similarity with regards to the contents of learning, there is the speech-to-text contents. And so using this technology, we compare the contents of A and B, and the higher the similarity, we would recommend those to the new learners. And then what is most used often is keyword tagging. So if it's an area of interest for me, or I can select the area that I'm working in, and the similar contents through keyword tagging can be recommended. And so these kinds of contents can accumulate. So this big data AI being used in this curation process, in fact, we find that often happening. And in fact, when we did our own applications, you will see the red section where AI is applied, and on the lower part, that is curation by the educational managers. And in fact, the click rate was higher for AI-based systems, about 30 to 40% higher, in fact. And this is an example of use of AI in dashboards. So you can have 3-dimensional data rendition, data offering and assessment by use of technologies. The educational experts play a major role. So looking at BMT, for example, we are looking at a broad picture. We are fostering the future talents. So, but now we don't utilize enough data, and so the use of dashboards can fill in that void for us to set the better direction for the future. So this is the learner dashboard and manager dashboard. And for the learner dashboard, for example, word clouding is another leading example. And I'll be quick. For chat bots, there can be push and pull functions that can be utilized. So for example, pushing the learner to go on to the next level, and pull would be answering the questions raised by the learners. So both the strategies are used. They're used in 3 dimensions: training, reinforcement. Secondly is on onboarding, particularly for the new workers, new employees. So if there's a terminology that I don't know, they can ask the chatbot. And then the third aspect would be performance support. So that is carrying out what has been learned online. So learning and remembering and implementing those learning. Well, chatbot plays major role in the latter half of this process. This is the AI avatar lecturer. So for example, the famous Korean anchor Kim Joo-ha, there was an avatar or an AI Kim Joo-ha that uh, presented the news at one time. So we at Hyunet, we are developing these AI avatar lecturers also. Because if we're going to have real people be the lecturers, it's going to take us a long time. We need to find these lecturers, train them, record and make the broadcast, record the broadcasting. However, if we utilize the AI lecturers, we can very speedily develop these contents. And another issue is that there are some very excellent lecturers who have poor delivery. So they would touch their face too often. I mean, there are a lot of distractions that hinder concentration by the students, and so we can prevent all of those problems by using the AI lecturers. And so we are developing different lecturers. For example, Rosie is being used in a lot of commercials recently, so we are developing different types of lectures. It's the same for metaverse as well. I will be finishing in 2-3 minutes. It's used in 3 areas. Well, VR has good immersion effect, and so it's used for 2 aspects: in medicine and in airlines or aircraft, as well as disaster prevention. For example, training for fires or earthquakes. And AI, when used properly, can be integrated with the workflow. So this is for an example from DHL. So previously they had to do a lot of manual work, but now with the use of AI, just click taking photos is going to give you enough information, access to information for increasing efficiency. So it's become a part of work. And there's the metaverse platform. So Zepeto and other cases are coming to the fore. Of course, there are technical limitations still, but mostly it is being used in onboarding first for and leadership. For leadership training, for example, they're not very useful yet. And so there are areas in which this technology is fully fitted. So this, for example,
메타버스는 어떨까요?
this telephone technologies used previously, they're no longer fit for today's environment, for example. So again, for metaverse platforms also, there are areas where they can be useful and areas where they're less useful. And so for HRD people, it's important for you to understand the technology first and then understand in which areas these technologies can be feasible and effective. So with that, I will finish my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Director Hong. Terminologies, methodologies, and many new concepts have been explained through his presentation. And so we were able to see the latest trends in corporate education. Thank you very much for that presentation. So I will be asking 1-2 questions to our two presenters first, and then open up the floor to address the questions that we received from the participants.
김영일 교수님,
First, I have a question for Professor Kim. You said that you are an evangelist of MOOC. So you teach history at your school, but now you say that you have undergone digital innovation yourself. And you talked about the changes in the education field and also the changes in the method of learning. Now, from the student's perspective, well, since you do teach history, the students were accustomed to learning through textbooks. But after the digital transformation and innovation, what has been the response of the students? I thought of bringing some of my students here today, but I did not. But they are probably listening through YouTube. First, I want to talk about curation. In the past, during the analog era, what we did was we would look at one aspect and we would try to understand it after looking at the contents. But on the internet, you can see only one side, so you have to click and open up many different windows. It's a different approach. When we look at the internet websites, we only look at the first screen that we see, the first side. And if you look at the categories under that, there is About Us. It explains who made that website. And based on that, you evaluate that screen, that website. And then there are these different hyperlinks. So everything's connected through the hyperlinks, and you can open up new windows. Wikipedia, the English version, is a good example. Some people say you cannot believe or trust Wikipedia, but actually it's a MOOC that is widely utilized, and the people from Stanford and all these Ivy League schools utilize it. So many experts are joining on Wikipedia to actually certify the contents and review the contents. If you look at the Korean version, you may not be sure, but actually it's been in use for a long time. Whenever we purchase products, we look at the brands and make sure that these are certified brands. But if you look at the milk, there's no labels. We're talking about knowledge and information, and we can use that analogy of milk. So if you saw something on the YouTube and you saw something on the internet, it's the same as hearing something from another person. You've heard it from someone else. There's a lot of side effects of the internet. For example, there are comments that are uploaded and posted on message boards that criticize others anonymously. But anyhow, we have to actually try to utilize the digital contents to our advantage. And that is what curation is all about. Of course, a lot of these contents are written in English. When we suffered from the mad cow disease, I thought about what the disease would be called in English. So I Googled it, and then I keyed in that word, and I could find a lot of videos and contents. And if there is a content on the web, people think that that is true. That is a fact. The students of the history major, well, a lot of them are now utilizing the digital contents and these digital tools. I have a course of 11 students, and they are utilizing these digital tools. Yes. So we've just heard the professor say that he's changed the method of teaching, and the students are enjoying it. Yes, thank you.
The next question is for Director Hong. This is on workflow learning. Well, Professor Kim has talked about the pedagogy using technology MOOC as a tool for teaching. So to ensure that it'll be effective. But what is more important than that is to actually develop educational curriculum and educational program that can foster all overall talents. And Director Hong talked about education in at work. So workflow learning is actually a concept that I have heard about for the first time. And so the fact that many of the respondents say it's more effective to learn at work rather than in classrooms. So I think that's a surprising result. So can you please explicate about workflow learning? In corporate education, well, that's a concept that has been used for a long time. So the 70-20-10 theory has been very popular, and the WLP, workplace learning flow or learning program, is also very popular. So the essence of this is that learning and work will take place at the same time, at the same work site. So for the past 20, 30 years, I mean, there's been many similar concepts and terminologies that have been used, but recently because of COVID and digital transformation, I think that process has sped up. So it has become more important issue. It has been accelerated. So of course, HRD education does not aim at the digital transformation per se, but for workflow learning, we do need to utilize digital technology. And I think the situation is similar for universities as well. So when the students are learning, they're doing mostly on-site projects rather than in-classroom lectures. So I think we are seeing that trend happening in all aspects of our society. So it's not exactly the same, but in the universities also, uh, previously we had one-sided lecturing, but now we are transitioning to problem-based learning and other more open types of learning. And so what's happening in society, what's happening actually at work, and what are the issues that we are currently facing? How are we going to address those using the knowledge that we have accumulated so far? So previously, the university and industry collaboration mostly focused on the professor-led projects, but now I think there's been a shift towards taking the actual problems or issues from work and trying to put that uh, into learning in the classroom. So I think that is another form of digital revolution. You talked about micro learning, and personally, what was impressive for me was the LMS system. So in the university, we call this learning management system, but recently, learning experience platform or LXP has become more important. So this platform is a common terminology, and it's not that we want to catch up with the trend, but learning ultimately has to do with doing. So you learn by doing something, and I think that is also is connected to the entire workflow process. So we are talking about higher education, innovation, and revolution in the digital era. And when I say lecture, I mean, who has to be responsible for the quality of the lecture? I asked this question to the students and the professor, but I think the responsibility lies on both the teacher and the students, because it also depends on the attitude, the receptibility by the students. So we are in the digital era, and this action called learning or education, uh, when we try to assess who is more responsible, I think both sides have to take responsibility. But still, if we're going to determine the ratio of the burden, who is more responsible? Is it the teachers or the students? Director Hong, do you want to go first? I think that's a very difficult question. But personally, my view is that, of course, both sides needs to change, but I think that the learners are changing very quickly, but it's the lecturers, the teachers that are not able to catch up. And so I think the emphasis has to be placed on increasing the capacity of the teachers, because the learners are able to learn online, but it's the teachers, the professors themselves, who are not able to offer these services. And so the teachers often say the perception about technology is that they feel that they may be replaced by technology, but it's not that they will be replaced, but they have to be so-called Iron Man um, teachers. Iron Man, they just wears a suit based on excellent advanced technology, so they're just regular people. So it has to be the same for the teachers. If you utilize these digital technologies, you're going to become heroes in terms of education. So if you actively use these technologies, you're going to be more efficient, more effective teachers and professors. So the gap between those who do use technology and those who don't, it's going to become bigger and bigger in the future. And so I think that's another issue for the universities to determine how to reduce that gap. So both the learners and the teachers have to work, but it seems that the bigger burden lies on the teachers.
So, Professor Kim from Simultaneous University, you've undergone a lot of changes. Can you answer this question? Yes, if I may continue from what I left off, where I left off. Yes, I talked about the Japanese experience of the Meiji renovation. So that was when the ferry came and demanded that Japan opens up its door. This is the time of the Meiji Restoration. And they told the Japanese that we will come back in a year, so you have to make a decision. And so the Japanese decided to open up to Western forces. So the people from Korea, Kim Ok-kyun, etc., they actually went to Japan and they saw what was happening in Japan. And so these were the proponents of the Enlightenment movement in Korea. Please use the microphone for interpretation. So if you use a Google translation, you can actually receive translation into any language. For example, there's Peter Wells from UNESCO. And if you actually Google his name, you can find all of the different videos of him speaking. The Denmark Prime Minister has a lot of video contents of him, and we can actually curate the contents about the Prime Minister. And this is the approach for these online courses. We curate the different contents that we can find on the internet. So we just have to overcome the challenge of this foreign language barrier. As long as we know the spelling of the speaker in English, we can key in their names and we can find so many different contents about these speakers. So I understand there is a genuine hesitance to utilize contents in English. It's the same for students and educators, but we have to learn how to utilize these contents in English. The professors, they have a lot of knowledge, and we call the professors designers. They can design the lectures and the courses. We call them the avatars and the designers, and now we call the professors curators. So the role is changing. In the past, for example, from Harvard or Yale or Berlin, these were the schools and the regions that the professors had studied in. But now, regardless of where you studied, it doesn't matter because you can actually utilize the same contents and provide it to your students. You can identify the good contents and provide them to your students as a curator. And then after watching these contents, then you can engage in a discussion with your students. Yes, so he just talked about how you can utilize the various contents on the web. You can select the good contents for your students as a professor, provide it to the students, and then you can engage in a discussion with your students. Of course, the selection the selected contents could be quite grand in terms of the size or the volume, but nevertheless, there are so many that contents that are being offered. So the professors, as a curator, will have to select them. And utilizing digital technology, there's so much more to offer, is what the professor mentioned. Okay, so we have some questions from our audience. So let me go first, Dr. Hong.
You talked about the redesigning of learning journey. What is the cost-benefit analysis result of this transition? So because there's limited resources that the companies can utilize for this shift. For example, there was a 3-day course offered to the employees at the department store, but if you're going to have a 5-6 month course offered, isn't that going to be more expensive? But in fact, digital transformation means that there's a reduction in cost, because if you have a 2-3 day physical courses offer, you need to borrow the spaces and it's very expensive. But of course, when you do the digital transition, there's more effort on the part of the lecturers, the teachers that they have to put in, but the remaining costs go down overall. In fact, I had a related question. I was interested to know that as well. And so it seems that the digital transition doesn't really require a huge increase in the cost. So the tools that we are using to learn, we have to newly introduce these technology-based tools. So we may be concerned about the concern, but I think that is not a major concern right now. Previously, we offered a audiovisual resources for learning, and I think these technologies play similar roles in that they offer the most efficient, effective ways of learning. And so this digital environment is indeed changing the entire learning and education field.
There's a question for Professor Kim. You mentioned that what the learners need is to sense the contents and curate them. So in that sense, the person in charge of education's role would be very important. Then what would be the source of capacity? What is the capacity required for these educators? I understand that in Glasgow, the Edinburgh University and another organization in England is working on a live MOOC. And as it was mentioned, I translated MOOC-related books for people to enjoy. For example, Andrew Nguyen's AI for Everyone. I think that all academic fields come from one source. But because of science and engineering, we are seeing many developments and we are seeing academia having spread into different categories and different fields. But now we can integrate these different fields. We can see many professors coming together. And this can be done very effectively through MOOC. MOOC in the field of academia can actually be called the fruit of digital civilization and the fourth industrial revolution. So the educators, I think, will have to expand their field of teaching by integrating these different resources of teaching, and connecting the different fields together and offering them to the students, I think, is the capacity required by these teachers and professors. Yes, so MOOC, I think, is a word now very familiar to people, the massive online open courses. You've all heard about this. And then there was OCW in the past, and then there's Coursera. There are many different MOOC offerings. And as a person in the field of education, I actually had fear that perhaps if there are so many distinguished professors providing these free uh, lectures and no one would listen to my lecture. But actually, there are these new concepts such as flipped learning, and we can have the students enjoy the lectures of these distinguished professors, and then they can come and work with me. So these are contents that can add on to the learning experience of the students. And as it was mentioned by Director Hong, we need an Iron Man-like teacher, educator. And so the MOOC courses actually can be a tool or a weapon to reinforce my lectures. Ironman professor. That I think will be my next goal. There are many ongoing efforts to promote the digital revolution. We're seeing a lot of innovations, and I think that the laymen, including myself, are actually a bit concerned about these developments and advancements. But I think that rather than trying to stay away or fear these changes, what we have to do is try to utilize the advancements in the field of my work, in my field of expertise. Because people are slow and they are inaccurate, but they are very smart at the same time. Machines or computers are very fast, but they are foolish. So, what we have to do is combine the strength of people, humans, and machines together, for example, AI, and then we can actually obtain a capability that goes beyond our imagination. And this is actually a quote from Einstein. So we listened to the two gentlemen speak today, and hearing what they've said, I think that there is nothing to fear. We can utilize the digital technology and innovations to this field of education, that we can open up a new frontier in education and foster new global talent. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the two speakers. Unfortunately, one speaker was not able to join us, and so we would be ahead of our schedule. I don't think that there are any further questions from the floor, but I would like to ask you, is there any comments from the floor? I'm sure that you utilize the online tool to raise questions. So if there are no questions, let us end this session.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentations and the discussion. As we have just heard, the leading universities and their courses can be accessed online through MOOC, and digital transformation is also leading to better educational performance management and care services. And so we look forward to more positive benefits from this digital transformation in the field of education. I'd like to thank President Chung Jintaek, Professor Kim Hyungyul, and Director Hong Jung-min. Once again, a warm applause for them. Thank you very much. We will be having lunch from now on, and the afternoon session will resume at 2:20. I will see you in the afternoon. Thank you.